160 years after Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Columbus being a third-order Franciscan, just so you know, and arrived on the shores of the New World with Franciscan priests on the boat with him. And the first Mass was celebrated on the shores, which was the first thing that was done when they got to ground after discovering the New World. The first thing that was done was they offered the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Sorry for that revisionist history out there that's teaching young people the wrong things. The first thing Columbus did was have the Mass offered on this new soil, in this new land. It was 160 years after that where over in Italy, things were just basically back to normal. Everything was normal over there. While everything was happening over here, the New World was being founded, evangelization was happening, missionaries were going forth to bring the gospel to the indigenous people. Back in Italy, it was just a normal day. And one day in 1570, the children were running through the streets and screaming, "The saint is dead, the saint is dead." Nobody told them. They were playing and they heard, "The saint is dead." And so they went running through the streets, singing out loud, "The saint is dead." The people immediately understood what was meant by this, and they rushed to the Franciscan friary to find out that it was true. Brother Seraphim had passed into the next life. This brother who for 40 years was so known to them in the little town of Ascoli Piceno. There he would beg for the brothers or he would be in the streets, but he was known by most as the simple lay brother who worked miracles. And miracles he worked by the dozens a day. Now, mostly when we read the lives of the saints, we normally don't see holiness in their really younger years. Some you do, like Blessed Carlo, who was just beatified this weekend, a 15-year-old kid, I forget how old he was, who died not long ago, will become probably the patron saint of the internet, considering he was setting up websites. But it's very rare that we see holiness in such youngsters. And in Seraphim, when he was younger, there was great holiness. He was an awkward child. He was pretty much of a fumbler. He was not very well coordinated, much unlike his older brothers, his three older brothers, who were following in the trade of their father, the stonemason. He was kind of the weak kid who was a bit of a awkward kid and was sent to go tend the sheep because he couldn't really do much of anything else. And he was happy with that because he got to spend most of his time praying. And he had a great love from the Lord from his very early younger years. And when he got a little bit older, he got the permission to make little pilgrimages, and he would go to the shrine of Our Lady. And a weird thing would happen when he would travel with his friends. They'd get to a river they had to cross, and so the boys would go swimming, and he would just walk across the top of the water. This happened several times in his life and was witnessed to and testified to that he actually walked on the water to the other side of the water when they would pilgrimage to the shrine of Our Lady. But he told all of his friends they were forbidden to talk about it until after he was dead. Eventually, he returned, he entered the Franciscans and became a friar. But he wasn't well educated. He could barely read. And so he was a lay brother, a simple brother, and not much was thought about him. And he was kind of like kicked to the curb, treated kind of like, just one of those go do the work type thing. And some people even took advantage of him. And then all of a sudden, miracles upon miracles upon miracles started to be working through his intercession. Little remedies he would give to people. He'd give them he'd make little rosaries, give them the rosary, and all of a sudden they'd take this rosary from him, they were healed. Or he would say something silly to them like, "Oh, just eat this apple and you'll be fine." Or these crazy little remedies, and they were completely healed. It had nothing to do with the apple. It was his prayers that was doing it. And one day his superior said to him, "How do you work these miracles? Where are these coming from?" And he said, "Well, one day I was really, really bothered by all of the people who were tormenting me and treating me terrible, and I was very upset and hurt. And I was praying before the tabernacle. And the Lord told me in my heart that I was to pray for my tormentors and to love them. And if I do, he would hear and answer my prayers for people. And so I started praying the rosary every day for those who mistreated me. And God now hears my prayers. And that was the secret to his sanctity, was to love those who maltreated him, to fulfill that gospel command of loving those who mistreated him, turning the other cheek, but turning it with love and turning not just away from them, but turning to God and praying for them. And so miracle after miracle after miracle used to work through his intercession. One of his little silly things one day when they brought this girl who could not speak to him to pray for her, he brought the little girl into the church, sat her before the altar and gave her 3 roses and told the parents, she'll be fine. She's going to talk so much now. She's going to drive you crazy. And at his canonization process, the father testified that when they got home, not only could she talk, but she talked so much that they drove her crazy because she just would not stop talking when she started talking. Another beautiful incident, that there was a priest in the town who got a terrible disease in his hands, and his hands would ooze pus, and it was this terrible infection, and he couldn't even say Mass publicly because people were just disgusted by this priest's hands. And so one day he was making a little retreat at the friary and praying there in the garden, and Brother Seraphim saw the priest's hands and began to cry, because these are the hands of a priest. The hands that consecrate the Eucharist. And Brother Seraphim grabbed a bunch of weeds and began to rub the priest's hands with the weeds and say, the hands of a priest, the beautiful hands of the priest, the beautiful hands of the priest. And the priest was kind of laughing at the simple lay brother, and all of a sudden his hands were all green from the weeds. And when he washed his hands, they were completely cured. It was his love for the priesthood that his hands came to complete healing. Many years had passed, and he'd become an old brother, 40 years as a friar. He's in his, an old friar, and one day he was kind of hunched over, disheveled, and the minister general, the great theologian Lawrence of Brindisi, was visiting the friary, gathering friars to send to the missions and seeing who wanted to go. And old Brother Seraphim came walking in, his hair disheveled, his habit disheveled. And he said, can you put me on the list to go to the missions? And, Saint Lawrence of Brindisi, like, okay, brother, okay, yeah, I'll think about it, kind of very nice to him, and not knowing who he was. And so the minister general moves on to the next town, and as he's in the next town, this woman comes screaming through the streets, my son has been raised from the dead, my son has been raised from the dead. Brother Seraphim raised my son from the dead. And the minister general, Lawrence of Brindisi, looked at his companion and said, who is she talking about? He said, the old brother last night who came to you, wanted to go to the missions, the disheveled brother. And the minister general said, one of our friars is working miracles and nobody tells the superior? Like he had no idea. He was kind of a little upset that nobody told him that there was a friar working miracles by the dozens a day. He had such a great devotion to Our Lady, and he would spend his nights in prayer before the tabernacle because of his great love for the Lord, but also because at night he was suffered very many temptations against purity, but also the evil one would come and try to hurt him because he knew how powerful he was, and so he would spend his nights in prayer before the tabernacle. He slept about 2 to 3 hours a night, but most of his nights were spent before the Eucharist. One time, one of the brothers snuck in to watch him praying at night and was hiding and watching him. And he can hear him muttering, bring them peace, bring them peace, bring them peace, Lord, all night long. Bring them peace, but he couldn't make out the last name of who he was talking about. And then Brother Seraphim turned around and saw this brother there watching him and said, hey, go to bed. Go. So he went to bed. And the next day, the news came that this family that had been fighting in terrible violence within their family, that they had come to peace. And then he learned that it was Brother Seraphim who had been praying for the family that they would receive peace. Perhaps a deeper miracle than the physical miracles was the peace brought to families. So today I bring up this wonderful, beautiful saint on his feast day, this simple little brother who in 1572 gave his life back to God after so many years of service in the Lord as a simple, humble friar, to ask his intercession for those we know in our families who are in need, perhaps to bring peace to our families, but also to remind us that it's not about how much we know in wisdom about God, but how much we love God. It's about how much we love, how much our hearts are open to receive the love of God, how much our hearts are open to love God and to love our neighbor. The willingness to love and to be loved in the freedom that comes from the gift of the love of Christ Jesus. So may Saint Seraphim intercede for us today, intercede for our country on this Columbus Day, that Saint Seraphim obtain for us the grace of true love of God, true love of neighbor, the true willingness to surrender our lives completely to his hands, that we may also become instruments of God's love, God's mercy, and God's peace. May God bless you, and Mary keep you.